Most people spend their lives trying to escape fear. They hide from it, suppress it, distract themselves from it, and build entire routines around the quiet avoidance of whatever it's pointing toward. But the people who achieve extraordinary things often do something almost nobody teaches. They listen to it. Because buried underneath fear is information about what you actually want, what you're actually afraid of losing, and what you have been avoiding because the cost of facing it felt larger than the cost of staying still. Fear, used correctly, does not have to control you. It can become the coldest, most precise source of ambition you will ever have access to. Most people never realize that fear is not a malfunction. It is a signal, accurate, specific, and almost always pointing directly at something that matters. The mistake is not feeling fear. The mistake is treating it as something to eliminate rather than something to interpret. Because the moment you start asking what a particular fear is actually telling you, rather than simply trying to make it go away, the entire relationship between you and that fear changes. Think about it. Fear of rejection in a relationship does not appear randomly. It appears because connection matters to you, because the possibility of losing it represents a genuine cost, not an imagined one. Fear of being overlooked at work does not appear because you are insecure for no reason. It appears because your effort matters to you, because your sense of contribution is tied to something real, because the prospect of being unseen threatens something you have invested in. Fear of financial instability is not irrational anxiety. It is your mind correctly identifying a genuine vulnerability and trying, in the only language it has, to get your attention. Here's what most people miss. Every fear is asking a question. Fear of failure is asking how much this actually means to you. Fear of irrelevance is asking what you are doing to remain necessary. Fear of disappointing your family is asking what you actually owe them versus what you have simply absorbed as obligation. Most people never answer these questions. They spend their entire lives avoiding the conversation the fear is trying to start. This is where things become dangerous, not in the fear itself, but in what happens when it goes consistently unexamined. Avoidance feels in the moment like relief. You step back from the situation that frightens you and the immediate pressure lifts, but avoidance is not free. It is a loan against your future capability, and the interest accumulates quietly, invisibly, in the form of a life that gets slightly smaller every time you let fear dictate where you will not go rather than using it to understand where you need to go more carefully. Look closely at your own life for a moment. Is there a version of yourself, bolder, more direct, more exposed to risk, that you have quietly retired in favor of a version that stays safe? Most people have one. The version that would have asked for the raise, started the business, ended the relationship that had stopped working, said the honest thing instead of the comfortable one. That version did not disappear because you lacked the capability. It disappeared because avoidance, practiced consistently enough, becomes identity. You stop being someone who is currently avoiding something and become someone who simply is the smaller version, full stop. And the fear that produced the avoidance gets buried so deep beneath the resulting habits that you forget it was ever a choice. The uncomfortable truth is that this shrinking rarely feels like loss while it's happening. It feels like comfort. It feels like wisdom. It feels like simply being realistic about your limitations. But comfort, sustained long enough, is one of the most effective ways a person's potential gets quietly spent without their noticing. Living for comfort is not neutral. It is a decision, repeated daily, to trade the discomfort of growth for the absence of discomfort altogether. And the absence of discomfort, over a long enough timeline, produces a life that never required very much of you and never, as a result, became very much either. Here's what changes everything. Confrontation, not aggression, not recklessness, but the deliberate decision to face the specific thing the fear is about, builds a kind of capability that avoidance can never produce. Every time you do the thing that frightens you and survive it, your nervous system updates. Not through positive thinking, through evidence. The fear of public failure shrinks slightly each time you fail publicly and discover the world did not end. The fear of rejection loosens its grip slightly each time you are rejected and discover you are still standing afterward, still capable, still moving. This is not motivational language. It is simply how psychological capability is actually built, through accumulated contact with the thing you were afraid of, not through the accumulated avoidance of it. Pay attention to what happens next when this shift occurs. Once you understand that fear contains information rather than just discomfort, you can begin doing something far more interesting than simply enduring it. You can use it strategically. Machiavelli understood, in his unsentimental observation of human behavior, that the people who function most effectively in difficult environments are rarely the ones who feel no fear. They are the ones who have learned to extract what is useful from it and discard what is not, taking the heightened awareness fear produces without being captured by the paralysis it can also produce. This is the distinction most people never learn, the difference between reacting emotionally to fear and acting strategically in response to what it reveals. Reacting emotionally looks like avoidance, like overcompensation, like the frantic activity of someone trying to make an uncomfortable feeling disappear as quickly as possible. Acting strategically looks like something colder and more useful, taking the fear's information seriously enough to prepare for the thing it's warning you about, rather than simply trying to numb the warning itself. Think about fear of financial instability. The person who reacts emotionally to this fear either avoids looking at their finances altogether because the anxiety is too uncomfortable to sit with, or spends compulsively to manage the feeling of scarcity through temporary abundance. The person who acts strategically does something entirely different. They let the fear motivate the unglamorous, disciplined work of actually understanding their financial position, building the buffer that would make the fear less accurate, developing the skills or income streams that directly address what the fear was pointing toward in the first place. Same fear, two completely different relationships to it. One produces a life shaped by what the fear made them avoid. The other produces a life shaped by what the fear made them build. The surprising part is that ambition, in many of the people who display it most convincingly, did not emerge from confidence. It emerged from exactly this kind of fear, converted, through discipline, into fuel. The fear of being forgotten produces relentless output in people who cannot tolerate irrelevance. The fear of being financially vulnerable produces obsessive competence in people who refuse to be caught unprepared again. The fear of being unseen produces an intensity of work that looks, from the outside, like passion, and is, underneath, the precise, cold conversion of a vulnerability into a driving discipline. This changes everything about how you should think about your own fears. The question is not how to get rid of them. The question is what each one is pointing toward, and what disciplined, strategic action in response to that pointing would actually look like. Here's what most people never realize about emotional discipline. It is not the suppression of feeling. It is the separation of feeling from behavior. You can feel the full weight of a fear, genuinely, without minimizing it, and still choose a response that is not dictated by the fear's first impulse. The fear of rejection can be felt completely and still not prevent you from making the request, starting the conversation, taking the risk. The fear of failure can be present and acknowledged and still not be allowed to make the decision about whether you attempt the thing. This separation, feeling fully, acting deliberately, is one of the rarest and most powerful psychological skills a person can develop, and almost nobody is taught it directly. Most people assume that if they feel afraid, the feeling is supposed to determine the action. It is not. The feeling is information. The action is a separate decision made by you, informed by the information but not controlled by it. Look closely at the people who seem unusually capable of sustained, focused ambition over long periods of time. The kind of ambition that survives setbacks, that doesn't collapse the first time it's tested. In almost every case, what you are looking at is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of a working relationship with fear that has been built deliberately, often out of necessity, often because the alternative, being controlled by it, became too costly to continue. These people are not fearless. They have simply stopped treating fear as an emergency that requires immediate relief and started treating it as data that requires careful interpretation. The uncomfortable truth is that fear becomes genuinely dangerous only when it goes unexamined. An unexamined fear does not disappear. It migrates into avoidance patterns you don't recognize as avoidance, into relationships you stay in or leave for reasons you haven't actually identified, into career decisions made from comfort disguised as practicality, into 100 small daily choices that are actually fear's choices, wearing the costume of your own preferences. This is how fear becomes dangerous, not through its presence but through its disguise. It stops announcing itself and starts quietly running your life from underneath decisions that feel, on the surface, like they were yours. This is also where fear makes you easy to influence, a fact that matters more than most people consider. A person who has not examined their own fears is a person whose behavior can be predicted, and in some cases, directed by anyone who understands what those fears are. The fear of social judgment makes a person compliant in groups they should be questioning. The fear of financial loss makes a person accept terms they should be negotiating. The fear of being alone makes a person remain in situations that no longer serve them. Every unexamined fear is a lever someone else can find, whether they are looking for it deliberately or simply benefiting from its presence without ever naming what they're doing. The antidote is not eliminating fear. That is not available to you. The antidote is examining it closely enough that you, rather than the people around you, understand exactly what it's made of. Here's what most people miss about the relationship between fear and preparation. Fear, when taken seriously rather than suppressed, is one of the most effective preparation systems available to a human mind. It sharpens attention toward exactly the vulnerabilities that need addressing. The athlete who is afraid of underperforming uses that fear to train more precisely. The professional who is afraid of being exposed as unprepared uses that fear to actually become prepared, rather than simply hoping the exposure doesn't happen. The fear is not removed by this process. It is metabolized, converted from a paralyzing presence into the specific, productive discomfort of doing the work that makes the original fear less likely to be realized. Think about your own life again, more specifically this time. Choose one fear you have been carrying, something that shows up repeatedly, something that has shaped decisions you may not have fully acknowledged it shaped. Ask what it is actually pointing toward, not what it feels like, what it is about. Fear of irrelevance might be pointing toward work you have been neglecting that genuinely matters to you. Fear of being left behind might be pointing toward a comparison you have been making that isn't actually useful, alongside a genuine ambition buried beneath it that is worth taking seriously. Fear of disappointing someone might be pointing toward an obligation you have never actually examined, one you may be carrying out of habit rather than genuine conviction. This kind of examination is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be. The discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are finally doing the thing that avoidance has been protecting you from for years, looking directly at the information your fear has been holding, rather than continuing to manage the feeling while ignoring what it has been trying to tell you. The people who achieve the most are not necessarily the ones with the least fear. Often they have more of it than most people would tolerate, more exposure to risk, more public failure, more direct contact with the things that frighten ordinary ambition into permanent retreat. What separates them is not the absence of fear but the refusal to keep running from it. They understood at some point that fear contains information and that every fear is asking a question, and they made a decision that most people never make, to actually answer it. The difference between the life fear gives you and the life fear properly understood, can fuel you toward is not talent. It is not luck. It is simply whether you are willing to stop avoiding the answer.